So my name is Bonnie Maney. I'm with Mission Critical Partners. We want to just start by, thanking you all for entrusting us with doing this study for you. And, what you're going to hear tonight is the findings and recommendations from the report that we put together as the after action and improvement plan that's specifically related to the derailment from February 3rd. We're going to cover different aspects of communications, fire, EMS, law enforcement response, unified command, emergency management, public information, and then environmental protection. The second half of the document that you all received includes an improvement plan based on those findings, and then the steps involved to be able to, what your next steps should be to be able to resolve and ultimately improve should, heaven forbid, something like this, not necessarily a train derailment, but some other sort of mass, large-scale incident occur. I'm also here with Brian Melzer. He's one of my colleagues with Mission Critical Partners. My background is primarily public safety communications, operations, 911. I did spend some time in the Army Reserves, served as an MP, so for the law enforcement side, and then I also have a master's in emergency management. I've been in the field for going on 34 years, consulting for about 14, 20 in the actual 911 center and management, telecommunicator, all of that as well. I'm going to let Brian just kind of give a little bit of his brief background as well, in case there's some other questions that are related to field and things like that. And Brian, if you would,
sure.
please.
Thank you. So, like she said, my name is Brian Melzer. I was excited when the chief reached out and said you were looking at us to help with this project because I live close by. I live 20 minutes away. I come from a 35-year fire service and emergency management background in a neighboring county. And I know a lot of your responders and kind of how things work here, and have even been to incidents over in the past year, although not this one, which was fine for me. But that's one of the unique things about Mission Critical Partners. We are a nationwide firm. We've done many of these types of assessments. We've done work for Columbiana County as well in the past with consolidation discussions and radio communications. So we bring people that have local background, but also people that have nationwide experience. And this team I know that worked on this project was a very diverse team from law enforcement, fire service, emergency management, you name it. We brought in those types of people. As a fellow first responder, I think we all know the process here of an after-action report is for that improvement plan. And I know, Chief Derailment, that was one of the first things you and Peggy outlined to us when we sat in that room back there when we first started framing out this proposal, is the ultimate goal here is any incident that we respond to, there's room to improve. And I think the nature of this incident that you all had to deal with, there was a lot of noise out from other sources about the overall impacts of the incident. And this particular report is really meant to focus down to the local level and it's not a tactical assessment. Bonnie's going to go over all this, but it's meant to focus on your level. Like, what are the things within our control that we can improve upon? And I feel that our team and your team, because this was a collaborative effort of everybody, captured it. So I'm excited to kind of see more of the findings. Again, I'm local. We want to have a long-term relationship with the village, with the county, and your people know how to get a hold of me, and I can be over from Newcastle in 20 minutes. So.
Thanks,
My
Brian.
wife had me here at Shaker's Woods Festival on Saturday, so I got that excitement in my life over the weekend. So.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brian. So what we're kind of a quick agenda, and I want to be very respectful of your all's time. I know you called this as a special meeting. I know that you've just had, you've had the NTSB here about a month and a half ago, and they, went into a lot of detail. I will say that when listening to those hearings, it was very much in alignment with the things that we were finding as well, which is also should be comforting in many ways and maybe disturbing in others. But we share MCP. We share your guys' commitment to public safety, the mission, making sure that your constituents, your field responders, and your first responders are safe and protected. And like Brian was saying, with an after-action report, you're really looking for those areas to improve. It's really not about blame or trying to point the fingers. It's about where could we get better, and focusing on those future outcomes to really mitigate anything that could happen in the future. So quick introductions. You guys did of course your roll call. Myself and Brian, it seems like we have great a small audience here, which is really awesome to see. We're going to give a quick project overview just to kind of level set so everybody kind of knows how we went about this project, what we did, how we engaged. And then we're going to dig into the findings and the recommendations, and then what those next steps, and then if you have any questions. If you have questions along the way, please feel free. We don't have to save them till the end, but just let me know. Why this is important, one of the things, is because this is the public safety ecosystem. And we say the public safety communications ecosystem. It's because we're communicating at all levels across everything. And it's not as simple as folks would think if they're just focusing on one area. If you're just focusing on just law enforcement, or you're just focusing on public works, or any of these things. The public safety communications ecosystem and everything that your fire, EMS, emergency management, your 911 went through that day, and your community took into account everything that you see on this screen. On the left-hand side is where, how the calls were coming in. How is information being received from the public to the 911 centers? You can say your 911 center is the box in the middle. That's that initial incident and information going back and forth. That third column, that's all the responders, the field responders. And we're talking about your primary field responders, police, fire, EMS, and then alternatives that could be. And then off to the far right, that's all the other partner agencies that had to be involved in this communication. Emergency management, hospitals, mutual aid coming in as well. And so it's this whole thing, and at the bottom, it's this whole community, voice, data, response, all of this cycle of communication. And it's done in many, many different ways. It's not just radio, it's also social media, digital, all of these other types of ways that these communications have to take place. And so as part of our charge was to look into each of these areas, and we'll kind of show you how we focus those areas into in different ways. But what I want to kind of emphasize here is that this is not something to take lightly, that it's just, these after actions, especially in public safety, are very complex. A lot of things we have to look at, which is part of the reason why Brian said we bring up people that, from all over the country to kind of, as part of our teams to help this. So this is kind of like really simplifying, because we really did this in 3 phases. We had our first phase, which was our project initiation. And then we had our second phase, which was data collection, and I'll talk to a little bit more in depth of what we did there. And then the third phase really was writing the after-action report and the improvement plan that produced the document that you guys have in front of you. So for data and information sources, you can see the various things that we used up here on the screen. Incident status summaries, community newsletters. I'm not going to read through all of these pictures, timelines. I know we asked for a lot, and we really, really appreciate all the hard work that everybody did to get us the information. Radio transmissions, call logs, all of these types of things we asked for. They're not always easy to get. And, but we needed them so that we could balance kind of the qualitative interview information that we were hearing and we were talking to people with the actual recordings and that quantitative, the number data. So we needed all of this stuff to kind of, get the picture as accurately as we could. And as we found out in the review process, even sometimes what we were told, we needed to go back and look at again because information was presented that said, no, that's not accurate. So we went through a very lengthy review process. So the different folks that we interviewed and met with were all part of these groups that you see up here. Community, we held a session with that. It was virtual. We really appreciated all of their participation. Communications personnel, emergency management, law enforcement, fire and EMS. The commissioner was also a drone pilot. Which one of you is that? No, not here. No. I thought that was interesting. Public, the PIO is public information officer, city administrator, and then Ohio and the United States EPA. So there was a lot of folks that we met with. We guided these all through a series of questions. We, of course, made sure they had an understanding of the project. And then what we were really looking is to identify themes and trends in all of these conversations. So we asked them the same core questions and then went into all other conversations that related specifically to their areas of expertise and interest. And so it really broke down into 6 different areas: communications, incident command, liaison efforts, interstate mutual aid, interactions with federal, state, regional, private sector, and then interpersonal skills and personnel performance, which you see on this screen, and really how they all related within the emergency management phases on there on the left, which is your preparedness, response, recovery, and what you want to ultimately achieve is mitigation so that you will lessen any losses that you would ever have if something similar or of a large scale like this were to happen again. So in the report itself, I kind of mentioned this before, if you look at the report, it is broken down in this way. You have your key findings section as well at the top of each of these. So each of these 6, oops, if I can get back. Maybe not. Okay. So in each of these 6 sections that you see, let me just rephrase that. As it relates to, communications and public safety, law enforcement, or fire EMS, law enforcement, unified command, emergency management, public information, and then environmental protection, each section is broken down like this. So you have your key findings, and then there's kind of an overview analysis. And then we go into what are the operational strengths that were experienced in each of those areas or demonstrated, followed by the areas for improvement. And then we articulated any challenges and obstacles that could be faced when trying to make those improvements. So each of the focus areas are broken down like this in the report. And then following that is, again, the improvement plan, which lays out the recommendations and, and how we think that you can go about those. So any questions so far? All right. So when we did the initial run through of this, like I said, about a month and a half ago or so, I was a lot more detailed and stuff, but I know, again, I want to be very conscientious of your time. And you've all received a copy of the report now, so if you have any questions, we can dig deeper. I do want to kind of highlight, certain areas in particular, and you'll see them with a gold wrap around it. But we really want to make sure that we're focused here, again, on improvements, not blame, but making ultimately improvements moving forward. All right. So starting with communications and PSAP, which is Public Safety Answering Point, or 911 operations, basically here. So we know that before we go anywhere else here, this, as a train derailment, taxed East Palestine and all of the surrounding resources just by the sheer magnitude of the incident. And for that and your all's response to that, you should be congratulated. I mean, any municipality 3 or 4 or 5 times the size of East Palestine would have struggled, right? There would be challenges. The question is, what were your unique challenges compared to what maybe somebody else were to have, experienced? So we know that East Palestine Communications are one of 5 primary 911 centers that operate in the county. We know that you guys are responsible for providing 911 call handling and primary dispatch services for East Palestine Police Department, Fire and EMS, New Waterford Police and Fire and EMS, and then Middleton Township Fire and EMS as well. And from an operational perspective, I mean, they did the best that they could do under the circumstances, but the challenge we want to highlight here is this one telecommunicator on duty at a time. And as Brian mentioned, we did a consolidation feasibility study for Columbiana County a while back, and we some of these things were articulated. Even though the teamwork, the willingness of staff to come in, the fact is the telecommunicator that was on duty that day actually had 7 months experience, and she was the sole person in that 911 center when this happened. So that is definitely a challenge. NFPA 1225, so the National Fire Protection Association, their standards, 1225, their voluntary standards, do indicate that you should have 2 telecommunicators on duty at all times. And this is something that was highlighted again back in the earlier consolidation study report. Now, even if there would have been consolidations, would there still have been challenges? Yes, but the challenges would have been different. The folks would have been that needed to be reached out for mutual aid would have all been in the same room communicating face to face instead of having to make additional phone calls in and out. So, but again, it does not take away from the fact that they did a good job with the resources that they had. And then there was another telecommunicator, I guess it was down the street, and he heard everything going on and he ran in to help, and then resources started, arriving, to support. The other challenge here, we know, is about the training. And Norfolk Southern, conducted a tabletop training exercise back in October of, I think it was on the 27th in 2022. It was actually focused on a train derailment scenario hazardous materials release. It was attended by, fire and EMS personnel. It was attended also by some law enforcement, but no communication staff attended. And so that, when it comes to thinking about, the training in this, when the training is offered, trying to find ways to make sure that people do attend. It can go a long way. I actually just had the opportunity to attend just a session at a conference with CSX Railway, and they were talking about some of the different tools that even you guys used or were trying to use during that, and it was very informative. So even anything that you can get online, bringing people in. So that was also a challenge that we wanted to highlight. And you're going to hear these things in Mrs. May, you kind of mentioned this succinctness of kind of these key areas, and you are going to kind of hear this repeat of training, of radio communications, and staff, right? And so you're going to kind of hear that theme throughout. The radio communications did severely hamper the ability to communicate with mutual aid resources. Things were garbled, transmissions were not received well. And again, as Brian mentioned, there was a study done previously that did highlight issues like this as well. Now, and there's just because of the natural terrain around here, there are challenges with radio communications and those types of things. But it was again highlighted repeatedly with the inability to transmit, loss and lack of accountability and things like that.
I think it should be highlighted, just a couple things that Bonnie mentioned, about the one telecommunicator on duty and the, let's face it, if this had happened across the border in Beaver County, who has probably 15 telecommunicators on at a time, or even Allegheny, who has 50 or 60 at a time, they would have been overtaxed. And they would have had people that didn't have the same training that we're talking about. So we're identifying something, and as you all know, the first responders, some of the things that have been learned here are starting to propagate across the country, but the need for data from the railways, training for telecommunicators. So when you hear these things, don't feel like you're alone.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're not. And, had this incident happen in the county, in Lawrence County, that I was a director of for many years, we had some of the same challenges.
Right.
And they probably would today too. So that I just want to emphasize that. But this gives you a roadmap on how to improve it. Same thing with the radio communications. It's one thing to get a finding, in a study from us that there are gaps in the communication system, which it did, but it's also then to find the funding and implement the fix. It takes time and it's tough to do. So again, don't sit there and think, oh, we knew about this and we didn't do anything about it. No, I mean, putting in a countywide radio system is a very monumental task.
Right. And I'm glad you said that, Brian, because when we get to the things like what are the obstacles to these improvements, it is those things, trying to find the funding, trying to find those opportunities to do that. It doesn't mean that people aren't trying to make it happen. And we know that there's already been some movement on different things like the training and things like that as well. And it's not just train derailment incidents. Small 911 centers are plagued by different situations. I mean, Uvalde, Texas, a mass shooting, a school shooting, that was a 1-2 seat 911 center as well. Different type of mass casualty incident, but it's involving a very life-threatening situation, bringing in a lot of resources, a lot of confusion and things like that. So it's these things, any improvements that can come out of this can have not only an impact here, but can also help with other agencies as well, and how they can do better as well. So what you guys are doing here, again, should be commended. But we know that there are obstacles to these things as well. Yes.
Has there been any thought as to satellite backup communication systems for something like this? Because the terrain in this area, no matter what you're going to have problems with radio transmission.
Right. The state has the MARCS radio system, so when they start bringing in their, once those mutual aid requests can be made, those types of things can be helpful. FirstNet, if you've has anybody heard of FirstNet? Okay, so they're being able to bring in resources, those as well. That sometimes it's just a matter of how much time does it take to get here? Where are they located? Making sure that they are programmed with all the various systems that need to be done, and then distribution of all that, and all that does take time. You can condense time somewhat, but some of these things still naturally take time to get on site unless they are right here in your back door, in your backyard.
That's what I was wondering, if the county would have access to that, to have it on site, to be able to disperse it a lot quicker.
I'm not sure where the MARCS unit is located.
Columbus.
Columbus?
Columbus?
Yeah.
That's close.
Yeah.
We have a Marks Tower in town,
Correct.
but nobody's on Marks except for Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
And keep in mind too, and the report gets further into it, but when we talk about radio communications, it's not always the technology. Sometimes it's the sheer amount of activity that's going on no matter what channel it is. It just makes the messages don't get to where they gotta get to sometimes, because either they can't get on a radio frequency because there's so much talk on it. So it was not just about the technology and coverage as it was just the massive size of the incident and the massive size of the response. And every first responder has a radio, or their truck has a radio. So that becomes a problem, and it becomes a problem everywhere.
Yeah, but you also had to take into consideration the multiple radio frequencies.
Yes.
They were going back and forth, and the incompatibility.
Yep.
Right, that is definitely a part. And so as we get into fire EMS, when we started talking about the field response side of this, that's where we heard, initially this was a solo department dispatch, right? It was, just East Palestine itself, the fire department. We know that the first 30 minutes were very, chaotic, very confusing. That's to be expected. There were, everything was really channeled into one radio frequency, and once that gets overloaded, right, you have to have the ability to, diversify that, to spread that out, right, to be able to, unload some of that radio traffic. And those are things that are more procedural in some ways too, that really don't cost anything. But what we also know at that time, during that first hour, the incident command location was initially, it was put too close to, the incident itself. That part, as far as, so true incident command structure kind of didn't get started, within that first hour, which then kind of makes things a little chaotic. Requests for mutual aid, again, those then kind of get piecemealed. There was discussion about how things are just send everything. That's a quote we heard quite often, was about just send everything. And so it's like, okay, well, so everybody sends everything. Now, where do they stage? Where do they, how do you coordinate these incoming units? And a lot of that, again, can go back to training type of thing. Let's see. So those are that last one on there was how that does really impact accountability for firefighter safety. And so, firefighters, they run on the incident command system. And so when that is not clear, it can impact, the accountability for their safety. This kind of relates and kind of falls into the same thing with law enforcement. Of course, you see the radio systems as well. They had some challenges, of course. So carrying 2 radios, trying to affect the door-to-door for evacuations, those types of things. Excuse me, my throat. And then they, again, just lacking, again, the NIMS training and the knowledge and the incident command system knowledge. It really falls into those same 2 things. Unified command, going back to like the command post, it's was initially too close. There was discussion about that there was no control going in and out. So you got a lot of people coming in, very loud, tough to communicate. Now you're face to face with a lot of noise that you're trying to communicate over. It was moved, but again, it was still within that blast area. Emergency management, EMA, their staff is limited. So while, fire crews, law enforcement, they're all out there, dealing with that. This is kind of where the staff part comes into a little bit of not having enough staff. So you've got your deputy director of, Columbiana County EMA. He arrives on scene. He's acting as a battalion chief at that point instead of the deputy director for EMA. The director was notified, and then, once you have this immense incident and you have all of these people asking for mutual aid, which is going to go through EMA, they're now coordinating resources, handling logistics. They're doing PIO duties, all of these other things, assisting with public messaging, speaking with council and all of that. And here's where we found that they are probably understaffed in their capacity for things like this in general. And that's at the county level. That's really not at the the East Palestine level of But we wanted to bring those in because that's who you all go to when something like this happens and you need their resources.
And that's another thing where you're not alone. I mean, whether it's Pennsylvania or this part of Ohio, I've explained that to our team. It's not uncommon where the fire chief is also the public works director and the emergency manager in Pennsylvania, where they have local EMs. So, kind of, they call it the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker all in one person. You get by day to day with those types of things, but then when a big incident like this happens, it becomes a challenge for that person and those roles, because usually at a county level in our area, emergency management is understaffed, as is fire. So I'm glad that was pointed out there.
Yeah. And the next box that you see up there, the request for EOC activation was denied. There was a decision made at one point that rather than opening up the EOC, which was farther away, to keep things here local. And so that, but that's where the resources are to be able to do those things. That's what the EOC is for.
Bonnie, I think it's important to identify why that was denied. It was denied because of communications. There would be no radio communication from Lisbon to here. It just doesn't work with the current radio systems. So everything would have had to been done over cell phone.
So there is that, again, an obstacle, a challenge to why that would have taken place. Thank you, Chief. That last one there, the other one with the training. Now we know that CCEMA, they provide a lot of training, regular basis. They're always doing the announcements and putting information out there. Again, once it's put out there, then people need to be able to sign up and take the training. And that's not just East Palestine. Again, it's entire county is available to this training. Now, it's not required, though. Training is voluntary. And that's, you'll see in our recommendations, a lot of this taking steps to make these things required. Not just for advancement, but as part of your regular duties, especially in those things that that you have the opportunity to have a hazardous incident. So we do understand that too, that at the state, and we did make this a recommendation, you'll see, is that they have limitations on class size. Not limitations, they have a minimum class size, that if they don't have 15 people attending, they'll cancel the class. So you'll see in our recommendations that we did make a suggestion to try and obtain waivers to that minimum class size from the state, especially again in those things that that you have that will directly impact you, like train derailments and things like that, ICS, until you get your staff up to the required training levels. And then, and then work from there, then you're just maintaining. But until that time, ask for waivers on those numbers. So we know that was kind of a constraint that everybody was dealing with as well. From a PIO perspective, or public information officer perspective, the digital delivery methods, they really were the quickest way to get information out. One of the challenges there, though, was because some things were taking a little bit longer than social media and all of their false information, or what's the kind of speculation on what was going on, and all of that starts to snowball. And so that we saw some of those effects happened because of just the amount of time it takes to get that out. So all of these things really help in the future to kind of leverage them as much as possible to get accurate information out. But once the public affairs group, they were notified through CCMA, once they got on scene, we know that they actually did a really good job of starting to get information out to the public. But that still kind of, they had to play catch up with all the misinformation that had been kind of put out there up until that time. And then the EPA, both Ohio and the U.S. EPA, they have really good, they really were able to, I don't have anything highlighted on here, just overall in general. They did provide, a lot of good information, a lot of support. They, they have the hazardous materials specialists, on those kinds of, which we know provided a lot of, information. There was some delay in getting EPA notified, and it's not the EMA's director's responsibility to do that. So that took a little bit of time, but it ultimately did take place. And so, I mean, we really don't have any ability to enforce or anything to do with the EPA, but again, we can make some suggestions, and there were a couple of recommendations that we made regarding that as well. And so we kind of focused mostly on, even in this conversation, what's really within East Palestine's purview, but we did make recommendations throughout the whole document, or, on the larger picture, because it really is all interrelated, again, going kind of back to the ecosystem and how that works. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I do have a recommendation.
Sure.
We do have an amateur radio group in Palestine. Was that considered at all in communications?
We did not receive
Yes.
Was it?
invitation on it. Okay. Did you want to expand on that, Chief?
We considered it, but getting enough of them and putting them in danger is not an option.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
And probably the lack of the ability to activate the EOC.
Right.
Usually, that would have probably supplemented out of the EOC.
Yes.
That have been activated.
Yep. And again, it goes back to just those things that we kind of like summarizing back down to training, radio communications, and staff. Those three things, and they're all, they all have their constraints. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. All right. So what can we do? We kind of, we've ripped off the Band-Aid. We've talked about all of that. How do we then, what can we do from here? So our findings, we broke them down into coordination, planning, systems, equipment, and training. And if you look at the arrows off to the right under coordination, to really address unstructured unified command, uncoordinated mutual aid, safety-focused coordination. So that kind of falls under there. Planning, real-time, unplanned, unscripted decision-making by dispatch and first responders, large-scale, multi-jurisdictional fire EMS response, not pre-planned, limited staffing and resources. So again, that PSAP single dispatcher. Systems, equipment, the radio coverage, the inability to have interoperability, and then that channel saturation and lack of control all fall under there. And then with training, dispatch and field responders with minimal or no training on large-scale incidents of this nature. EMA training, preparation, experience was an asset. And then low attendance, non-mandatory, and attendance thresholds fall under the training in those 4 areas. Operationally, we know that the incident response, it benefited from the teamwork, staff willingness. They worked extended hours, and they supported the local and regional, support from the local and regional partners. That was a huge asset here. But like we said, telecommunicators were challenged, facing real-time decision-making, also the lack of training, and so on there. We then took that, and the improvement plan, there's a total of 39 recommendations that span each of those areas. It's really easy, relatively easy for us to sit and suggest alternative courses of action after the fact, right? The Monday morning quarterback type scenario. But, especially when it's in a controlled environment and we can go and we can say, oh, well, you could have done this and could have done that. But anybody who's been in an incident knows that that's not always the case. Not every incident is the same, and it won't be, and that's just not how it works. So what we have to do is we just do the best that we can on making improvements where we can. We may not be able to do anything with the EOC situation with the radio system at this point in time, but the question is, are there other workarounds that we can include in planning to say that, hey, we need to do it here, but what other things can we do? So these really just draw on the findings from the report. So there's 39 recommendations. If we break it down, coordination had 12, planning had 12, systems and equipment have 3, and training has 13. When it comes to coordination, these are just kind of the highlight, the overall, kind of the overarching part of the recommendation. There's a lot more to them in the report itself. So 12 of the 39. When we looked at kind of where the responsibility for future coordination on addressing these came from, all of those 6 areas that we talked about, from communications, law enforcement, fire, PIO, emergency management, EPA, 4 of them relate to really needing everybody to come together and help solve that. The EMA, about 3 of them, they have a hand in, and then East Palestine Fire Department has their hand in a couple of them as well, where something that they can address on their own. So from a coordination perspective, you can see, again, creating radio communications procedures based on industry standards, committing to incident command on incidents. Now you have to have the training aspect, which is part of another recommendation, of course. Implementing the safety program and metrics, developing event pre-planned response plans, and include more robust documentation in all hazards plans. So when we started looking at some of the documentation, we found some areas that could be improved upon in those plannings and documents. We want to make sure that you continue offering training and doing those things that you do. Again, but that's where we said about the recommendation of getting with the state and helping with the thresholds, but then mandating training as well. Don't make it voluntary. The EOC for large-scale incidents, we understand that there is that constraint. How else can that be managed with some different planning or opportunities there? Hot washes following all disasters, high-profile emergencies. We understand that they were done a little, here and there, but not kind of more collaboratively or holistically. And then we even talked about creating a regional PIO team or a public information team that can be brought together a little more quickly than
having to get, state resources. So then from the planning perspective, we said there's 12 of them here again. When we look at, the collaboration needed moving forward to help make some of these happen, there's 4 of them or 3 of them that, kind of take everybody to come together. One of them also includes elected officials. EMA one as well, and then another one that they will have an assist role in. The fire department, again, there's about 4 of them here that kind of specifically are focused on them. One of them is shared with the PSAP and another one with emergency management. And then the 911 center itself, 2 of them are really focused on the 911 center, and one of them is also one that they share with the fire department. So when you read the report and you look at them, you'll see more this direct line. I'm just trying to kind of summarize that and say it really is going to take everybody to come together to help with some of these things. So when we talk about planning, we really do encourage that you look back at the 2021 feasibility study for Columbiana County on the consolidation, revisit that, and see if there's something that you can do there. So develop a PSAP consolidation plan, explore how that could take place, improving your continuity practices and plans, engaging in coordinated cross-agency planning sessions, bringing folks together to do tabletops and help with those planning. Develop fire department box response assignments. I will give that one to Brian to explain what exactly that is in a second. Developing task force groups. So if there's focus areas to address these things, bring a group of folks that have that expertise together to address these specific planning initiatives. Implement fire staging policy. Apply for training grants. There's a lot of funds out there for different things to help with the funding constraints. Conduct rail incident training. Request staffing increase. And then develop appropriate public information and crisis messaging. All of these things, again, in the report itself, they are expanded out with anticipated outcomes as well as different steps that you can take to achieve these things. Now, Brian, the fire response or the fire department box assignments, what those exactly are?
So for the lake in the room, the non-fire service people, there are ways that fire departments and dispatch centers can set up requests for mutual aid so that you know what widget you're getting or what resource. So they're done in advance. The fire chief would sit down with the dispatch center and say, when I need a water tanker or when I need an aerial, this is the first one you go to, this is the second one. You can go as far as you want. I mean, you can go all the way out to 4 states away if you wanted to. And then those are either in the old days, they were done on paper. And, when you hear people talk about 10 alarm fire, that's generally what it means, is that they've used 10 of those alarms. And all of those resources that are in those various 10 alarms kind of roll up to the scene. Now, in today's day and age, it's done with technology, which, it's done through the computer-aided dispatch system. So that instead of that fire chief having to say, just send me what you got, they could just say, I need tankers, or I need 5 tankers, I need 7 tankers, I need 3 aerials, whatever it is. And it's all kind of pre-programmed into the system so that the dispatcher doesn't have to, or the dispatcher on the receiving end doesn't have to try to decipher that. They could just say, bring me the next alarm, the next alarm. And I'm sure you use some form of one, but I think what we're saying is if you don't have a box alarm system, it at least needs to be built out further. So, and that isn't just specific to fire service. There are special response plans in today's day and age for law enforcement and EMS. and so on. So it's just a more organized way of, before you're sitting there at 8, 9 o'clock at night trying to figure out who to bring in. It's a way in a plan already. Now, there's going to be incidents that are going to go beyond your planning levels. Some would argue that this incident would have done that even in the most prepared area. So we acknowledge that, but that's what a buck's alarm.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. The next one, when we talk about systems and equipment and training, we put these on the same slide, but they do, again, from a responsibility perspective, going to take a combination that very similar to the previous, where there's 3 of them are going to take them all. EMA has one in particular. The fire department, again, has about 4 of them, and then the PSAP is focused on 2 of these. Systems and equipment, it really focuses around the consolidating the multiple radio systems into a county system. Whether that can be, with the MARCS just system, the state system, or finding another way to consolidate these multiple radio systems into one. Then the training side of this, looking to conduct some scenario-based training. Not necessarily, whether if the state can provide it, great. If EMA can provide it, but even at a local level, walking through policies, walking through procedures, walking through plans, so that you are prepared for these hazards that are going to be forever present in your community. They're not going to move the rail. They're not going to move the rail tracks, right? You're not planning for everything. You're planning for the things that, from an emergency management perspective, can be reasonably, expected that something could happen, right? In Florida, I'm not planning for a blizzard. I'm planning for a hurricane. Those types of things. And, require the ICS training for all staff, not voluntary. Engaging EPA, Ohio, and the U.S. to obtain the capability training. Require, again, the hazardous materials training. Don't make it voluntary. Work to reduce, I mentioned before, work to reduce those reduce the thresholds, or eliminate the thresholds if you can. And then coordinate the PIO training, again, so more folks have that ability to serve in that capacity. Any questions about the improvement recommendations, improvement plan recommendations? I know 39 sounds like a lot. A lot of them are they kind of all fall into that same kind of area. And then when you go into the report, we do break it down further and give some steps. So next steps, again, and Brian has reinforced it, and I don't think we can say it enough, what you all did on that day with the resources that you had, and as over the terrain and the geography that you have, you did a good job. Can you do better? Can we close some gaps moving forward? Yes, I hope we can. But again, looking at this ecosystem, it doesn't matter the size of the incident, you're still trying to make sure that this is healthy at the end of the day. And so don't ever, I would say that don't let anybody take away from you the magnitude of what you handled and what you did. So some suggested next steps, they really focus around, these 6 things right here, that collaboration we cannot, talk enough about, bringing people together. Implement that improvement plan. So is that collaboration, talking about that improvement plan, how are you going to put that into a strategy, prioritize those recommendations in the improvement plan, what are you going to tackle first? So implement that, and then train some more. Planning. So once you're implementing that improvement plan, part of those are all those planning elements of those recommendations. Continue to plan every time that you learn something new. How does that going to impact? And then once you've done the implementing the plan, training and planning, you need to exercise those plans. You need to exercise them to find out where the gaps still exist and practice, so that if something were to happen again, and again, maybe not a rail incident, maybe it's something else, then it will be second nature to people to be able to respond. And then ultimately what this should all result in is the steps is improving the emergency response outcomes, right? And having those metrics to show that, even if something isn't happening, something big, that even on a day-to-day basis, these things that are being put in place are helping your constituents, helping your first responders, improve emergency response outcomes even on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't have to be something big. Some of these things can improve, just the daily lives. And again, it's easy for us to say that after the fact. It's not going to be easy, right? But hopefully that what we have given you and provided to you is going to at least get you started in that direction. Again, we, as MCP, once you are part of the MCP family, we are here to help guide you and discuss those things in the future as well. So make sure you reach out. I know Brian said he's local. I know he'll be in communication if there's any other questions. So with that, any questions we can answer, any comments anybody would like to make, we were open to answering anything you may have.
Are most of the suggestions and recommendations, are they attainable?
We like to think that they are, because if we give you all things that are not practical and unattainable, then exactly. What we really try to strive for is to find ways that you can move the needle. So within some of those bigger, maybe seemingly unachievable things, if you start with some of the smaller, more attainable things, they can even have a cascading effect that ultimately those larger things may, further down the road, those longer term objectives, that they are more attainable the closer that you get as you do some of the smaller things. So it really is a progression to improvement. It's kind of continual improvement, if you will, and so you'll get there gradually.
This isn't the magic bean anymore. We just
No.
throw it out and it happens.
No, because at the end of
It has
the
to be long-term planning.
it does, because at the end of the day too, you all or whoever comes after you is going to have to continue working the roadmap to be able to get there. And so it will take a lot of collaboration, and it will take, if some of you are no longer on this council, or whoever's next on this council, be able to have the roadmap to continue forward and know what the goals are. Because some of these things are not going to be easy. They are going to be longer term. And so that's why we say, when you start collaborating and you look at how you want to implement the plan, coming up with that strategy and prioritizing the recommendations, determining what you can do short term, what you can afford to do now, and then what are some of those longer term things that you're going to have to do some more planning and funding and broader collaboration for.
Okay.
So an example of some of that, Councilman, is the training, the mandatory hazmat training for the fire department. We were at probably 20% prior to this incident. We're at about 70% of everybody. We've been sending them as we can.
That's good.
As far as the NIMS compliance, all the officers have taken the hierarchy NIMS classes, the 300s, 400s, along with several other members. Everybody meets the minimum requirement across the board, but we've excelled those administrative, quote-unquote, members to the higher classes that they should have had. Previously, they all had those now.
Have you accelerated the timeline on this too?
Have I personally, for
Yeah.
my department? Yes.
Okay.
I think it's comfortable saying, Rick, Josh, we're 75% complete on all the recommendations.
Okay, good.
Is your organization available to help work with our first responders and with the community to help establish priorities?
Yes.
Like what things need to perhaps be done first or what's more feasible, because we're not Youngstown or Columbus.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Our biggest constraint on any of this, and it's very obvious, our biggest constraint is money, but the money that associates to is that communications aspect. That's our biggest problem overall.
That's going to be the biggest
Correct.
expense anyhow, regardless.
Correct.
Well, that, and I would say, well, and it is money as well with the, with the consolidation, that part of it as well.
Yeah, as it stands now, come the first of the year, we're going to be limited to talking primarily to Columbiana and Mahoney County. We won't be able to talk to Beaver County anymore. We currently cannot talk to Lawrence County just because of the frequency we have, which we as the village and the fire department, we don't even own that frequency. That's not even ours.
Anything else?
All right, nothing else. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the
Thank you again.
presentation.
Yeah, this is excellent.
Thank you again
Thank you
for
very much.
providing us the opportunity and the trust to do this with you all.